name is Marco Karls. I'm president of the European Association of Technology Enhanced Learning, and I'm very happy to welcome you all here. I would like to spend 2 minutes saying something about EATEL. It's a European association that has been established in 2007 in Germany as a non-profit organization with the purpose to foster research and education on technology enhanced learning and to network in Europe. That was the main purpose of funding this association. The association has 2 flagship events, which you might know. That's the European Conference on Technology Enhanced Learning and the Joint European Summer School that we are organizing already for quite some years. We are very happy at the moment that we are also having a European project on doctoral education in TEL, the DTEL Erasmus project, where we are aiming at improving the cross-institutional and cross-country collaboration to give kind of a European support infrastructure and networking for PhD students in TEL. Some words on the session today. So the board of EATEL, we have exchanged also some ideas what we can do in the current situation. And as you have seen, many sister organizations have organized online events to support lecturers, teachers who are new to technology enhanced learning. We think this is a very important initiative, that there is some support from experts, and as experts we are of course all involved helping out our colleagues, but in the end we have decided that we would like to reflect in this session on what's happening currently on a higher level. So we want to compare the policy situation in several European countries, and I'm very, very happy that we have a very nice set of experts here on our panel. I would like to give a very short introduction, and I'm starting with Monica. Monica Di Vitini is a professor of cooperation technologies at NTNU and a member of the management team of the Norwegian Center for Excellence in IT Education. And she's also responsible for cooperation with schools. Monica was invited to give a keynote on our annual summer school in Greece this year, but of course, due to the pandemic, it has also been canceled. Monica, thank you very much for being here. As a second panelist, I'm very happy to have Alison Littlejohn here. She's the director of the University College London Knowledge Lab. She's a learning scientist specialized in professional and digital learning. She has a very impressive portfolio of topics, research projects, and I think many institutions have been competing to get her in the last years. Alison was the one who confirmed really after minutes that she would like to join this meeting. I'm very happy to have you here, Alison.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Then I would like to introduce Lucia Panese. She's the CEO and research director of Imaginary, I hope I'm saying it right, a company focusing on innovation projects in the field of TEL with a special focus on serious games and digital interactive technologies for healthcare and training in Italy. Lucia is since many years very well connected to the research community due to numerous projects and publications. Thank you for being here, Lucia.
Thank you very much, Marco.
Then I'm coming to my fellow board members of EATEL. I would like to introduce Davinia Hernández-Leo. She's a full professor at the Department of Information and Communication Technologies at Universitat Pompeu Fabra. And she's the coordinator of the Interactive and Distributed Technologies for Education Group, Vice Dean of the UPF Engineering School, and head of the Unit for Teaching Quality and Innovation. And she's my fellow vice president at EATEL. Hi, Davinia.
Hi, hello everyone.
And then we have Viktoria Pammer-Schindler. She's an associate professor at Graz University of Technology and a research area manager at the NO Center in Graz. She's focusing on TEL, human-computer interaction, with a focus on workplace learning and knowledge work as a domain of design and adaptive prompts, and user guidance as technology focus. And she is the secretary of EATEL. Thank you for being here, Viktoria.
My pleasure.
All right. So I would like to open the panel. I hope you all have seen how we organize this. We will spend around an hour on debating, interacting, thinking about some policy changes and what it means for the countries, for Europe, for the institution, but also for technology-enhanced learning as a research field. And then after this, so you can always ask questions via the chat as a participant. In the last, I don't know, 20 minutes, half an hour, we will also give you the word and you can join in. I hope this works for everybody. I would like to start the question round to the panelists to focus a little bit on this policy reaction in the different countries. I would like to start with Alison. Alison, what is in general the situation in the UK with respect to school closure, planning of teaching in higher education? How did schools and universities react? What is the role of digital media in the situation? Can you give us a short impression? What is the current situation?
Well, it's been such an interesting time. So over a very short period between March 12th and 16th, every university in the UK closed down their campuses and pivoted to online learning. Students were advised to either travel back to their country, place of residence, and learn from there. Therefore, there was very little time for most people to change their teaching to online. Exams were either cancelled. So for example, first year students, many universities are not going to examine first year students this year, or the exams were shifted online, and that's been very complicated. I can go into more detail later about what that actually meant and how people managed to pivot. Pivot is an in term at the moment, so how they managed to move their classes online. But in general, what it really meant was that rather than designing for online learning, people were taking the face-to-face teaching and simply putting it online. This was a huge challenge for lots of the support institutions within the universities and the IT people, but in general, it went much more smoothly than most people imagined. Now, at the same time, there was a working from home policy which happened between March 16th and 19th. And initially this was for academics, but was quickly extended to all staff. And staff who'd never worked from home had to find ways to set up how they were going to work from home. So this was a huge challenge to lots of staff. And it was compounded by, at the end of that week, all schools closed, apart from for the children of key workers. So we're actually carrying out a study at the moment to think about how people are working from home and their anxiety levels, which I can tell you a little bit more about later. But what does it mean for policy in higher education? So there's an organisation in the UK called Universities UK, and basically it represents 137 universities across the UK. And they're predicting there's going to be a £780 million deficit lost to the economy in the UK this year alone, just in this academic year up until September, because of students not being in residencies and possibly a reduction in the number of students. So they've set up support for universities around key areas that range from well-being of staff and students, admissions for next year, which is complicated by the fact that we don't yet know how schools will assess the next cohort of incoming students. Support for the national effort. So medical schools, for example, have released all staff to go into hospitals and high dependence units to help with COVID-19. And of course, international, it's been a huge impact on the country and the sector in general, because any visiting staff were advised to go home, and all students as well. So having any kind of international exchange has been very complicated. As you know, many conferences have either been cancelled or gone online. So there's now very much a focus on admissions and teaching, and many of us are working to scenarios where campuses might open in September or might not open till January 2021. So that's the story from the UK.
Perfect, thank you very much. I would have quite some questions, but I think we first do the round and then we dive deeper. Thank you, Alison. I would like to continue with Monica. Can you tell us a little bit about the situation in Norway with respect to school closure, higher education, use of technologies? What is your impression?
No, I like that you ask what is your impression, because I think that really in these days I hear so many people that seem to have the perfect overview, the solution. I think that we have to accept that we all are experiencing different things, seeing different aspects of the problem. So in a way, we have to be humble, and I think it will take a while before we can really see what has happened. So my impression, Norway closed on the 13th of March, university and school quite abruptly. We got a message, 12 o'clock we close, everybody goes home. Now Monday, the upcoming Monday, they are reopening kindergarten. In 1 week, they are reopening schools from 1 to 4. And then depending on how things will go, we'll start also reopening upper secondary school. So the idea is to bring back all the kids before the school year is closed. They have canceled exams, and the university has already announced that there will be no campus activities, at least until the beginning of next semester. Now, we say that the schools are closed, but really it has always been a partial closure. It has schools and kindergarten have been open for kids of workers in critical context, but also, and I think that this is an interesting part of the discussion, for kids with problems. So I think that a lot of the discussion around closing and opening schools in Norway has been around the social role of schools and the role of schools to leverage societal gaps. So that I think it's the school not only for learning, but for the general well-being and as a societal important societal role. I think that when it comes to schools and university in general, I think that is interesting to think that Norway has a very good internet access. I think more than 98% of households are reporting having internet access with large broadband subscription. There is good access of computer at home. So this is, in a way, there is a good infrastructure both in schools and in the households. I think one small thing that we maybe can reflect also in terms of TEL is that we have seen in the years decreasing the number of computers at home. So it's still quite high, but a lot of people have moved probably to handheld devices. And when you have to work on that the whole day, so that's what we see also for our students, that they suffer not being able to go to the university. Yes, they have internet, they have a good subscription, but they are connecting with their phone or tablets, and it makes the long-term work very challenges. School generally use already learning management system for communicating with the families, so that is not a major problem. The most of the region have also offered for the schools to pay data packages for houses who don't have access to proper connectivity. And especially in schools, there is a strong emphasis on privacy. So teachers have to use the tools that they are provided from the school. Again, whether this is the case or not, we still don't know, but at least that is the guidelines that they receive. And we are planning a study now for understanding how teachers, so it's quick and dirty, but to get some input on how teachers are experiencing this transition. And then from next semester, we want to follow up to see, does it make any change when things will go back to normal. Some of my colleagues in the Excited team have also run some questions, some surveys with teachers at the university and in school and students to get also feedback on this transition. And I think that maybe I should close here because I have probably used more time than I needed.
No, it's fine. Again, I would like to later go into more details. I think it's quite interesting also that you mentioned the social gaps that we are creating with focusing solely on technology. I would be very interested also to hear how these data packages have worked for people who don't have internet access. Actually the use of personal devices is also not such a reliable factor in many countries. So I think we should go deeper on that later, and also the privacy aspect, because I also see that there are very different levels of centralization when it comes to schools and the access to technologies there in different countries. Okay, then I would like to shift to Lucia. She can tell us a little bit again about her impression. I fully agree to Monica. It's much too early to draw conclusions, really. So this is also what this session is meant for. It's just an open questioning. It's reflection. We can of course not draw really conclusions, but I think it's really nice to hear this from different countries. Lucia, can you tell us something about the situation in Italy?
Of course, from north to south.
Yes, Andrea.
So, I've been conducting actually a little bit of interviews this week because I was not exactly into the dynamics of schools. So I wanted to learn a bit more from people with children, as well as from teachers, how they're living this period and what were the difficulties and so on. So schools closed around the end of February here, so very early. And they're also not opening again, at least for the rest of the academic year. So this is already clear. Nobody will go back to school before at least September, and there are already discussions about how to do that, if we should take turns with the classes. So somebody goes in the morning, somebody goes in the afternoon, and so on. So this is one of the tendencies that is coming up. Of course, I know a lot of teenagers and young girls, and their first reaction was, hurrah, we don't go to school, we have long holidays. But then again, of course, their reaction was, we're missing the social environment. So a bit like Monica said. And I must say that also with a bit of surprise, I found out that quite immediately, so let me say with 1 to 2 weeks delay after the closure, everything went to online. So actually, mostly for high schools. For primary school, as far as I understand, the children have received tons of homework that they have somehow to cope with, and parents are getting a bit crazy, and that's it. But especially high school, everything went online. and has been going on online, which is actually, which was a very quick reaction. So I found out that lots of schools had already some online access. The others bought one. The Ministry of Education here put quite a big amount of money on top of the amount that was foreseen already. So the schools who didn't have any access paid. Normally, if you want to know what it is, it's Google Classroom that they use. And then within this sort of dedicated area, by dedicated, I mean the access belongs to the school, so it's nothing that is open to anybody. Teachers are in a way free also to choose how to operate. So there again, there are tendencies. There are teachers who actually even protested. They said, this wasn't foreseen. Well, actually nothing was foreseen that we're living nowadays, but they had difficulties and didn't really want to switch online. But many caught the opportunity, and they're really excited and they're really super happy. Even they told me, I'm so happy about what I'm learning as a teacher, as a professor, with all this online stuff that is going on. And they do recordings, they offer materials, and they keep online lessons using Meet or some other kind of video conferencing tools in the end. And actually, the reaction that I recorded is that the most active ones have really, really an immense, I could say, power to support these students who are really grateful to these teachers. They're really standing behind these teachers. And somebody from central Italy, we have quite a different population according to the diverse regions. I live in Milano, so it's the industrialized area. Central Italy is also much more agricultural. A friend of mine who is teacher there, she said that some students in the morning, they have to wake up and support their parents on the countryside. So they really need to work in the country because probably they had to leave some working support at home. And so they apologize with the teacher because in the first lesson they cannot be attending online, and they're really super happy afterwards to get connected, although maybe there are broadband difficulties and they don't have a lot of technology support there. Some schools used also the fundings that they received from the ministry to buy some equipment that they give. I don't know if it's if they lend it or if they give it, I'm not sure, to people who cannot afford them, or to people who have, I mean, there are families with 3 children. Maybe they have 1 PC at home. So what are the other 2 doing to be at that time connected to their teacher giving the online lessons? So there's also this sort of mutual support. And then I found out also things like schools having broadband and connections, offering it to another school who didn't have the facility. So what I have seen and experienced in this period is a lot of solidarity, a lot of mutual support, a lot of people trying to find ways to support the others, which is actually splendid, I have to say. As far as universities are concerned, everything is online. That's easier. They have LMS systems which were running already, and everything is there according to, again, teachers and what they want to do, either directly online or also videos that they record to put it there, and then they have a question and answer sessions with the students. So that's working quite nicely. As long as exams are concerned, the written exams were cancelled for the time being. So everything went to oral. And they realized quite quickly that it's quite easy to observe the students and realize if the student is really immersed into the online discussion and the exam, or if the student is trying to like look at the book in a way and trying to cheat. So that's what they thought is quite easy. And even graduation sessions from university are offered online. And this plan will go on at least for the whole summer. So it's planned already for the July exams. It's already clear that they will happen like this. Should I add something about companies, Marco, as well, or later?
Let's focus on that later, Lucia.
Okay.
I think we do first the country perspective and then we go to the institutional. Thank you very much. Then I would like to go to Viktoria, telling us something about the Austrian perspective.
Yeah, I think in principle the situation is a little bit similar. So we were shut down around March 16. So in the week before we were asked to shut down at university, and from March 16 it was obligatory. And the schools closed either on March 16 for the upper schools and on March 18 for the elementary schools. I would like to highlight 2 points that I think are salient or particularly maybe important or noticeable to me. So the first, there's currently no systematic plan in Austria for the educational system. There is no systematic plan when to reopen kindergarten, schools, or universities. So there are plans for everything, but not for the educational system. I personally am very dissatisfied with that because I think it shows a disregard for education and for the children and teenagers and also for the families. Because there are a lot of parents who work, and there are, to put it mildly, very different interpretations as which children are allowed to go in school or not. The second point is at the university, we're in principle asked to do as much online as we can. Oral exams are moved to online, and I think all that is fine. It emerges that one critical point is the large written exams. So we have especially introductory courses with several hundred students where the exams are typically in writing, and it's very difficult to figure out how to do that in the current situation. Because there's also the issue, if I have a master student, I know this person, I can do the exam also online, because I mean, it's very unlikely that someone would cheat. But with 400 or 500 students, can I put everyone just in front of a video camera? So there are 2 universities in Austria who are now moving to these online exams where students will be asked to have their webcam online and so on. But this is really untested territory and difficult because there are also legal, well, there are official consequences for the students in that. Yeah, in principle, they get really high certificates, while at the same time, you don't have the same quality of control or of examination as in the other situations. So that is, I think, a big discussion. And the second point really is, I think it's not so much different. It's, I think, a little bit also what Alison said. The teaching has not been digitalized so much, but everything that we have been doing face-to-face is now moving to online. And especially in schools, a lot is still paper-based. So really papers are printed out and sent out. And we're also noticing where technology really doesn't work so well. And that is, of course, for the younger children. And we notice that video conferencing is quite a separate way, or quite a distinct way of communicating, and very different than to being face-to-face.
Okay, thank you for the perspective from Austria. I would like to move on with Davinia, telling us something about the situation in Spain.
Yes, the situation in Spain is very similar to the ones that already been described in terms of timings, in terms of approaches, in terms of reactions by institutions, by individual teachers. So there have been impressive reactions by teachers, by the individual institutions in suboptimal conditions and in almost no time to move into online support for learning. So this has been present across the whole country, the reactions of teachers and the institutions doing really their best in conditions that are very difficult. So it has been done in a way that of kind of functional silos, so no systematic arrangements of organizations across institutions or by the governments as a first stage, because there was almost no time and everybody had good intentions to try to overcome the situation in terms of teaching and learning. So systematic plan, systematic actions has been slow, but are already to be in place, are starting to be in place now. So there has been already some agreements by the educational community and the government, especially those and that have to do with inclusion, with learners, especially talking about the schools and high schools that maybe they don't have the means to follow online approaches to learning, or that they cannot have good support at home, so that they can have in an environment that is positive for their learning. So the agreement so far, they have to do essentially with inclusion, and the current policy that has been already approved, put into place in for schools, high schools, so not for higher education, is that at least the situation these months without face-to-face teaching, at least the situation, even though teachers and schools, they try to offer learning opportunities to the pupils, at least they won't have a negative impact on their assessments. So they can improve, but they cannot, I mean, they won't have an impact for them, for example, for next year to repeat again, to recover the same academic year of these kind of things. So no negative impact on their assessments, even if they cannot follow what is still pending in the academic year. So when they already accumulate, it will be enough for them to complete the academic year. And then now the educational community is planning together with the government what could be the best approaches to plan for remedial actions for those that maybe can be left behind. So this is in terms of policies, this is what is happening in Spain. No really policies the level of higher education, but the individual institutions are having formulated their own regulations. What is being done by the Ministry of Universities in this case in Spain is trying to articulate some responses and solidarity responses to the crisis, like trying to put together good resources, good best practices about what it means to teach and learn online, so that other universities, for example, for universities that are not purely online, can learn from this online learning distance university. So these kind of things are happening. So they are trying to articulate these solidarity responses of open resources for teacher professional development and this kind of thing. So this is really happening and trying, and the government is trying to help at least articulating. Of course, the teachers are doing a lot, institutions are doing a lot of redesign to the best possible extent, as I said, not to the ideal extent, it has been already said before. Because there are many challenges, the challenge of assessment, said before, the threats of beliefs that technology can solve everything, and there are many issues. Technology cannot solve everything. Also confusion about what are the best ways to teach online. We said before that in many cases it's been translation of the translation of face-to-face teaching to online learning, and this is not the possible best approach, but there is been an overwhelming set of recommendations about how to teach online that I think that there is a lot of pressure on teachers. I think that is good enough if they are doing this translation at this stage, because also, I mean, it's not the same context. They are not the same conditions. It's not the same to teach in a purely distance university, because the students are typically different than those that are typically enrolled in a face-to-face university. It's not the same to teach in an open online course. Again, the context is different. It's not only online, but the students are different. The profiles of the students are different. So there is a lot of I think, of confusion then, and probably too many recommendations for the teachers, a lot of pressure on them. Also, several worries being discussed in the community about the role of social presence through the technologies, inclusion already said, and I also said before, privacy and data security regulations, with some solutions in place, but a lot of room for improvement.
Thank you, Davinia. I did some notes. I would like to come back on 2 or 3 points of this round later on. But I would like to continue now really, and it goes a little bit already in our third block, but on this situation, for me, this is kind of a pragmatic turn in TEL. So it's really like we're coming we are a side topic in the educational system into ad hoc mainstreaming. And I think this is really, I'm very curious what it means. And like Monica said, I don't know what it means at the moment. I'm just asking myself, what does it mean? And also, what is the institutional reactions? That you have seen? So how has support been put in place? How are all these lecturers that never done something with technology supported? What is their impression? Because I also share the picture that you shared from the German perspective. I was, to be honest, surprised how resilient our teachers have been. While before the crisis, there has been a lot of pushback against using technologies, and I really like this pragmatic situation. This is now the only way we can do that. We are organizing ourselves, and of course, with a huge spread of practices from, like you all reported also, from okay, I need to put my teaching online. This means live video at the same time I'm normally teaching. So I think we might not like that, but I think this is for somebody with no experience, at the same time, a normal way to start this. You start from your current practices and you transfer that online, and there needs to come something. What have you seen in your institutions or in other institutions in terms of supporting teachers or lecturers? Maybe we start with Alison again.
Yeah, it's been such an interesting time. I think the resilience of colleagues and the amount of work that they put in to make sure that teaching went online was just so impressive. And if nothing else, it shows a commitment to the students themselves. It was very interesting that the first thought was, well, how do I make sure that my teaching is online? But then people very quickly realized that student well-being was very important, because we're not in a normal situation where we're simply putting our teaching online. It was a pandemic, which is completely unknown, and it was highly volatile and very agile situation. So I think that student well-being prompted colleagues to go from simply recording lectures, for example, and making those available to having real dialogue with students. So I think that's very important. So how did people learn to do that? There were 2 key ways, I think. At UCL, we have a centre called ARENA, which is the central centre that supports people in pedagogy. And we also have Digital Education Centre, and the colleagues there were just working flat out. We're bringing together all the guidelines, recommending people to use specific systems. There was a lot of recommendation to use the enterprise systems for the university, so Blackboard, MS Teams, and so on, and not use tools like Zoom because of some of the security issues. And actually, a lot of people got the information they needed simply from asking colleagues. So in the UCL Knowledge Lab, for example, a lot of my colleagues were contacted by people from many different faculties, and they were getting their own teaching online, but also supporting other colleagues. One thing I mentioned earlier is that we're doing a study which is called UCL Moving Online, and basically we're interested in how people feel about moving their teaching online, how they feel about doing research online, and also how they feel about working from home. And that's not always straightforward. It can be very complex. So in terms of working from home, many people who live near the campus are maybe in quite small apartments because of the costs in London, and don't have a lot of space to work, and they're negotiating with their partners who's going to work in the kitchen, who's going to work in the bedroom today. And there's been a lot of discussion about, well, how do I position myself as a professional and so on, and what does it actually mean to be working? And so it's very different. And of course there's the childcare issue, the fact that children are not in school, and a lot of parents are doing homeschooling, which really puts huge pressure on people in terms of juggling these work and also making sure that the children are okay, or they're caring for other people, or in fact they might be vulnerable people themselves in terms of having underlying health conditions, or having to stay indoors. Some colleagues know that they may have to stay indoors for extended periods of time, even if the campus opens up. It's possible that if you're having cancer treatment and so on, that you can't simply go back to work, and that you might be in isolation for a longer period of time. So we have been doing a lot of planning around scenarios. We know that, okay, everyone has now gone online with their teaching, and that has been smoother than we might have expected, although it's caused a lot of anxiety for people. But we want to make sure that we sustain this online learning. So if we have to, for example, start the next academic year online, we would like the online pedagogy for people to have a bit more time to think about what that means. And it depends very much on the subject area. So for example, in the social sciences, in some ways it's easier for people to teach online compared with some of the physical sciences. If you have laboratory work, for example, you might have to change how you structure the academic year next year, so that students will be initially learning online and then coming to campus and going into laboratories and so on. So again, that's another issue for academics to think about. There's the exams, end of year exams, which can sometimes be quite difficult online, especially if they're very practical exams. And also there's the admissions to university next year, because if students can't sit their end of school exams, then how do we know who to admit? And with international students, if they have to sit their tests for language proficiency, how are we going to deal with that? So do we admit students who don't necessarily have the certification that we might have asked for before? So there's a lot for us to think about, and we're doing a lot of planning around different scenarios at the moment, aiming to imagine how will teaching be if we keep teaching online until September, and what might it look like in the next academic year if we have to sustain online teaching until the end of 2020, and then going forward, what does this mean for us? We've had a huge change. So when the pandemic is over, what are we going to do in terms of online learning? So we're working with colleagues in terms of planning.
Okay, thank you. I really also like your idea of how can we, although it's ad hoc, although it's a crisis situation, how can we sustain that experience, and also how can we maybe use it as a reflection point for later on to maybe move on a different level. I think we need to come back to that. Monica, can you give us an impression of what are the lecturers doing that had to move online so fastly? How are support structures in Norway? Is there a lot of existing infrastructure that is used? What is your impression?
Now, in Norway, we started the semester very early. So when we close schools towards mid-March, it means that at least we have the courses already well on track. That I think it helps a lot, and that's maybe one of the concerns that we have if next we have to start a semester, for example, with a lot of group-based project, and so if we have to start those courses from the scratch online, what do we do? So it was for us in a way not the worst time to do the transition. And I think it's also interesting because a couple of years ago we have gone through a major merging with different university colleges in with campuses across Norway. And so there was already at the institutional level a strong pressure to go online, cross-campus teaching and so on, that everybody was opposing. No, we cannot do it. It's too complicated, the quality. And now we have to do it. Suddenly, in less than 1 week, we had to realize what we have refused to do for ages. So it's interesting to see how things can be changed when we are forced to do it. I think the technical infrastructure was there. I guess that as most of the university, we have a number of systems that are there providing infrastructure. They are far from optimal in normal condition, and then we realize that when we have only those to realize to base our teaching on is quite challenging. But I have to say that also from we had a tremendous effort from the teachers, but also from the technical support and different administrative positions that have really gone the extra mile for providing training, flexibility with access to the different systems. So we have continuously new training for doing at least using the official systems. But then of course a lot of us are using systems that are not the official ones. I think that this survey that I mentioned reported the use of around at least 28 to 30 different tools outside. So it's quite challenging because it may be good for us as teacher to use what we are confident to use, but at the same time it may be very, very confusing for teachers that have to deal with a lot of different contexts. A lot of the focus has been not strangely on the big courses. That means mainly lecture-based and with traditional exams. So as Viktoria was mentioning, also we have this big problem now of how we will do exam. Each teacher, each course responsible has been given the possibility to apply for changing the evaluation form. But I think that now we are starting saying, yes, we can change things so that they are that we can do that. But what are the implications long term? So typically, is for example, if the grade of bachelor who have to get admission to a master program or whatever. So we know that we have built a system where grades count, and now when we relax that, of course, it creates some disparity. I think that maybe international student, that's a big challenge. Of course, we are with a lot of students who had to leave, students who are stranded in different places that they have to sort of taking on board to avoid missing the here. And I think that really this mobility, even at the European level, when we have so many different so many differences in the calendar, as trivial as that, it makes things far from easy. And maybe I think that when we talk about also economically, so it's interesting, for example, that one of the university have started some grants for supporting exchange student who are not able to get back to their country. And we are also discussing about extension to for PhD students. Again, this is taken at the national level. So I think that now we are in a transition from okay, we are in a crisis. We have to do something now, to something where we start understanding that okay, maybe we have to coordinate the action across different universities. Maybe we have to start thinking what will happen on the long term. And when we think about PhD and postdoc, I think also that we have to think about as a form of learning, summer schools, conferences. That is also part of learning. So what is happening to that part? We know that we have canceled our our own summer school, and it was the right decision, but what is happening to that learning? So I think I can close here.
Thank you. Very, very interesting points that you bring into the discussion. I would like to continue with Lucia. She's not representing a higher education institution, but a company. So Lucia, can you give us a little bit of reflection on what it means for this sector of professional learning companies? I think Alison also already reflected on the new work aspect and so on. So maybe you can tell us something about this aspect.
Well, yes, I will not speak for my own company because my own company is in a sort of small niche, because what we do is game-based learning. So that's nothing that you, in a way, offer on a regular basis, like those companies working with e-learning or continuous trainings for example, in the normative or legal or administrative areas. So actually we haven't been affected at all, because it's what we do is project-based, and it's one shot normally on a single topic. But I've been discussing this with a colleague who is in the regular e-learning sector, and they work, for example, with big banks and offer all the normal training, procedural, normative, administrative, and so on. And actually there was a boom of requests. So in business terms, this was an opportunity for them, because first of all, there came all the new regulations about smart working. So in terms of normatives, if you have staff working from home, you have to teach them, for example, how to organize their working set, even the lights, or how they have to sit in front of the PC when they have to do some physical movement and things like that. Or privacy-based, for example, if there's your family around the house, you still have to preserve a company's privacy while working. Then one interesting point was for managers. They have trainings for managers, because their teams are now not together, but they're in very many different places, in different homes. So how do you coordinate a team where people are spread everywhere? Then there are some teasers, something like how to live in this period, even things against anxiety or being depressed or feeling secluded and so on. So actually there is a lot of, well, of work and of business around these whole topics. There are also some trainings for teachers that they have been putting together, how to make videos, for example, so that the videos are nice to look at and easy to follow and so on. And then some companies have been trying even to fill the free time, offering much more stuff like English courses or courses about how to manage your time and things like that. So in other words, because maybe not every activity can be done from home, in the spare time that you have, upskill yourself or improve your competencies with things that are useful, well, to you as a person, of course, but also in terms of business on the other side. So this was actually what was reported to me in this area.
Thank you, Lucia. I think it also goes into the direction what we heard earlier, that this is really a dimension shift. So it's not really, it's not only our educational system, but everything at one point of time emerges into everything is digital. So I think this is also very interesting. So like
Yes.
also what Alison said, so no, it's not only education, you also have to manage, you also have to have your family around you. So I think it's really, it's more than just online teaching or online learning.
Manage yourself, manage your time, and everybody independently from the sector is saying what you said also before. We will never go back to what it was before. At least we will keep a part or a big part of what is being organized today. Of course, we know that we have to improve it. For example, I had a sort of small wish list, which was very interesting, coming from a couple of university teachers. They all received a lot of IT support. There are even people for schools called digital animators that the ministry put in place to support the teachers. But the wish list says, I would like to have methodology support because nobody gave them this side, which was what you were saying in other words before. And the second one is, I would very much like to exchange experiences when this is over, to learn and make it better.
This is also what I heard from my German context now. So this idea of, okay, we did now something ad hoc, we tried our best, but we would like to have some level of feedback, and not directly in the sense of a professionalization or a training, but more kind of collegial peer activity. I think this is also a huge opportunity. And we come to that also in the last round. I would like to ask Viktoria, Davinia, do you want to extend on what has been said on the institutional level? So are there some special points that you want to bring in, what hasn't been said before for this round?
No, really, I think similar experiences here, from low participation in teacher training to high numbers of teachers, professors now in higher education participating in the trainings. I think it's important, something that has been said, the TEL support and the staff in the universities, they are now feeling really important, really contributors to make this overall challenge work of online teaching. I think this is something that need to be recognized. Their efforts, they are really practically working overnight to provide this support. And so now their roles in the different institutions are becoming really more important than it was before. Impressive reactions of lecturers and learners as well in the new context. Very important also in our institution, especially this idea of going from individual reactions of particular professors to a collective sharing of the practices and approaches. So we have really put it into practice from the beginning. Teacher community approach to share the redesigns, the real-time redesigns. They are still redesigning because I mean, they will be redesigning till the end of the academic year, I think, their courses, as they are in learning about how to do it, online learning better. And we are really promoting the sharing of these practices, the materials, the approaches in terms of teaching, learning, and assessment, and consolidating the key practices in the contents of our particular engineering school. No, in the case of my particular, institution in which I'm in charge within my university. But that's all I wanted to stress.
So also a chance of being more open about teaching in higher education. Okay, interesting.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, the teachers are discussing more than ever and sharing more than ever before.
Viktoria, anything to add on the institutional support? Can you share some thoughts?
Yeah, very briefly. I think most of what I want to say I can also add then in the final round. So at our university, we have a really very good support structure. So the Vice Rectorate for Teaching is communicating very well to the staff, even about the uncertainties, because that's currently the situation we have in Austria, that everything is very uncertain. And still, I find this communication very important to realize that there are different plans and we can plan for different scenarios. And the second is that we really have a great learning technologies team led by Martin Ebner here. And this team, as Davinia says, it provides a great infrastructure and tech support. And so we notice the importance of the infrastructure. And I think that Graz University of Technology, we have been lucky to have had a very good infrastructure in place before the pandemic. So we have been able to switch very smoothly to online teaching. I think in the backend, some scaling has been necessary to move to a lot of streaming and to move to a lot of videos, so to maintain the performance. But I think one thing this crisis shows is that a really good infrastructure is so important to a digital society, and that's really about network, about servers, and about having the systems in place. And that's really, I think, a big message that we all should have gotten. And then I noticed the same. Beyond this, colleagues are helping each other out. There are university-wide virtual meetings where you can ask questions or where you can exchange ideas. And also informally, we have been at the Institute, we have been sharing ideas and a little bit via Twitter, really concrete ideas. It's not about hints, do it like this or do it like this, but it really was about having quick ad hoc solutions. What kind of software can you use quickly and can you get quickly in order to move online in case such a software hasn't been in place earlier on.
Okay, thank you all. I would like to move on to the third round for now. And we could continue our discussion here because there is also in the public discussion on Twitter and so on, there is now a huge discussion that we say this isn't online learning, it's emergency remote teaching. I was really, I mean, I'm surprised very often in these days, but I felt a little bit that this is a difficult reaction if we kind of put all this motion, all these activities into the corner, like this isn't real online learning. This is not how you do it. So what is your idea? How can we take it from here? You all also said already something about sustaining these activities, networking and so on. I would like to spend some minutes on how can we take this opportunity that a lot of teaching personnel has now experience of the online level, no matter on which level. How can we take that productively into the future and help them to build their skills, competences in this field? So this is really something which I would like to hear from you. So how to take it from here, Alison?
Well, I think what we've done is we've dealt with an immediate issue, which is a pandemic happens and everybody has to go online. What we need to do is really, I think, two things. One is think about the sort of medium term, what are we going to do for the rest of this year, and then sustainability. So what will this look like in 5 years' time? And that really depends on the benefits to the learner. And what I mean by that is what are the advantages for students when they study online or use technologies. So clearly, one of the key reasons why so many university teachers put in huge effort, and school teachers as well, put in huge effort to make sure they went online was because they saw that as a benefit to the students. They didn't just want to not teach their students. So then we have to think about, well, what does that mean in the longer term? Are there specific reasons why we'd want to have either online courses, fully online or blended, or other specific pedagogies in different disciplines that we want to introduce for people? And how are academics going to learn about that? I think that's going to be in a number of different ways. So we already know that many of the people at UCL learned from asking a colleague. So we have lots of colleagues within the UCL Knowledge Lab who were helping other people as well as getting their own teaching online. So that's at one end of the scale. Then there's guidance from some of the central units, and that has to be very much more streamlined than it is at the moment. It was pretty much bringing together all that information. People can have a bit of information overload. They need to know, where do I go to get to know what it is I need to know right now? And then at the other end of the scale, we have programs already. So within the Knowledge Lab, we have our MA in Education and Technology, which is a really good way for people to be able to explore all aspects of education and technology. It really bridges the gap between how we might design systems and technologies and also the sort of education and social science aspects. So we can imagine that this is going to be part of the solution, not just at UCL, but at other places as well. And later I'll put the link in to that program. My colleague Manolis Marikas is in the audience here, I think. So if anyone has any specific questions, I do ask him. So I don't think there's going to be a single solution. I think it's going to be just basically planning what is it that where do we want to get to in the future. I actually think that not all colleagues are going to be quite so positive about going online. However, there's likely to be much more of a force. A lot of people have already made that leap. So I think we will see more learning online, and I think it will get better as time goes forwards, but we need to make sure that we keep the momentum going and we don't just simply fall back to where we were.
Thank you. Who else wants to comment on this? How can we sustain that? How can we take that up? Viktoria?
I think I've really wanted to say something on this because I actually think that the impact on TEL from this pandemic could go in two directions, and it has to do with the observation that you have been making, or the question that whether this is online teaching or whether it's kind of just an emergency response. I think what I perceive as the major direction of thinking is that this gives technology enhanced learning and digitalization a push. And we see that we have to invest in basic infrastructure and basic, well, equipment of schools and the educational system with learning management systems and, well, just the infrastructural stuff. On the other hand, because it has been an emergency response, I think, at least the perception I have in my environment, in the school of my children and in my own work and from colleagues, that we see how much the face-to-face interaction goes more smoothly and how much the face-to-face interaction is richer and more easy in many aspects. So I think the current pandemic could also be a pushback against TEL to say, okay, we will, as a kind of contingency measure, invest in the basic infrastructure so that in the next pandemic we are well prepared. But on the other hand, we don't want this for the regular education, because it hasn't really worked all that well, and then people will kind of draw out of their head everything that hasn't worked perfectly in this situation. And I think we all agree that online teaching now doesn't work perfectly, and really, I personally think that everyone on all ends is doing their personal best. But yes, if you move ad hoc from one day to the other, literally, to online teaching at scale, of course, it's not ideal. And so I really think that there are these two directions that TEL could go, and we should be prepared to. So when we think of sustainability, I think we should see that we need to discuss in both directions. Yes, we need digitalization. Yes, face-to-face interaction is really, really valuable. But yes, there is also something that we haven't yet experimented with at scale, and that's a lot of the technologies and socio-technical patterns of learning and technologies that we actually haven't experimented with. So there's a lot of adaptive technologies, intelligent tutoring systems, and all the fancy stuff, augmented reality, virtual reality, game-based learning. There's a lot of stuff that has been discussed in research that is really not in place right now. And that's okay, because this is just not at the same level of maturity where I can just search for the next free tool that I can just click on and use. One thing that I personally, because adaptive systems is one research interest of mine, is, for instance, we have now a project on an adaptive system for health literacy. So we have been working for nearly 2 years on an adaptive system with content on different levels of reading competence that covers the same topics, and we're now just studying in detail how this works or is not working. Ultimately, what we have been working at is, in terms of content of the curriculum, this one system addresses just one tiny piece of the full curriculum of school children in 1 year in one subject, okay? So in case of a pandemic like this, what teachers and students need is not a plethora of 100,000 different apps where the one app can teach you this one competence or this one half of the skill that you should learn. But they need one ecosystem that is coherent and consistent, where the teachers can really cherry pick the small, fine granular modules and say, okay, that's overall the way that I'm teaching, and this piece that fits into my overall strategy, and I can use this to teach one particular element. And so beyond this kind of basic infrastructural needs that I think we are all now seeing, internet, having devices, having the basic digital literacy to deal with online teaching and learning, I think there's something that we still are missing, maybe because the technologies that we research are a little bit too immature, and that is to have a coherent, safe, GDPR-ready and perfect learning ecosystem into which we could plug in small content units. And I think for me, the main message as a tele-researcher is also that content and curriculum coverage is so important, because it's just not enough to have this one tiny piece that covers half a something.
Okay, that reminds me of a lot of European projects in which we have exactly tried to establish that, and my experience was the larger the solutions, the smaller the success rate. But okay, Monica, you wanted to comment on this question.
Now, I may be old and maybe a bit emotional due to the crisis, but I miss my students so much. I miss to sit with them, have a cup of coffee. I miss when they made me mad because they don't listen, they chat in the classroom. I really, sometimes I say there are days I end and I say I don't want to have another Zoom meeting until I retire. Because it's not the same than meeting people. And something that worries me a little bit is that, yes, it has more or less worked, that there will be more pressure to keep on as we did now. More and more pressure for online learning. And I think that following what Viktoria also was saying, there is much more in tele than online learning. And I think that as a community, we should really work on what is more. How do we really create this learning experience that enrich all of us, and make system that we can use. Most of the system that we have realized in so many European projects, great ideas, but they never got to the point where they can use. How do we get there? What type of projects do we need to get there? And I think that then also the sustainability, I think that the training in terms of workplace reflection, community of practice sharing is going to be critical, really to reflect on what have we done and how can we really turn this into learning.
Thank you. One second to cheer. So that also gets something moving in my mind, because I'm also then asking myself, we as researchers in this field, have we failed to focus on mainstreaming? Have we failed on looking at our institutions? I mean, if you look at how the research has moved away from the institutions in the last years, going into open learning and so on. So not saying something against this, but I think it also has to do that because also research in the institution is so difficult to do with all the factors that play there. I think it might also have to do that we just searched for other fields of play. We didn't go back into our own institutions. And just an idea. Lucia, you wanted to comment?
Well, I was reflecting a bit on the fact that actually there are two angles to innovation. You know, one innovation is the one that goes on bit by bit, that we have probably been carrying out through the whole research projects, and it's methodologically sound probably, and sometimes we failed, sometimes it worked, but it's also tremendously slow in a way. The other one is the disruptive one. And this is what we've had now. We had to change because we couldn't just sit there and well, be static and not make things move in a way. And I think that one of the great positive aspects of this disruption was that there was a lot of, as we said before, resistance by, even on the emotional side, by people who thought, I cannot do that, I don't know how to do that, it's never gonna work, people will not listen, and so on and so forth. And they realized they can do it, it's possible, it's even working, students are listening, they even like it, and so on. So this was emotionally shaking a lot of people in the positive way. Now, I don't think we will ever go back to exactly what was before, but we will also not move into purely online, because the idea is not that everything will suddenly be online and we will forget sitting together, working together, or studying together. So I think that what comes now is like when we say top down and bottom up, we need to mix them. It's the nice methodology, the nice step-by-step, the nice pieces that we studied before now need to be mixed and support the revolution that has come today. And we will also have to find a sort of balance. Where do we need the online? Where does it make a lot of sense? Where will it support a lot of people? Where is it beneficial? And what should we keep the old traditional way? So finding a sort of mixture that makes sense. So I think that is the challenge that we will have to face in the next time.
Okay, thank you. There was a question from Catherine Cronin. She asked, what key advice would panelists have for education policymakers on institutional and national levels? Who would like to say something? Viktoria. Viktoria, then Alison, yeah.
Yeah, so my advice here would be to go into the direction of systematic reflection as soon as possible. So capturing ongoing experiences of all stakeholders, of school children and students of all ages, of the technology support, of the decision makers also in all educational institutions, and then to analyze this. These were all ad hoc experiences from this ad hoc shift. It's a huge life experiment in which we are now living. And I think what we can use these practices and experiences is to see what did people really miss, what are really practices that work. And this is the perfect databases to move forward. So it would really be systematic reflection, systematically doing interviews, doing focus groups, systematically doing contextual inquiries right now, as much as is possible. Yeah.
Okay. Alison?
My advice to policymakers would be not just to focus on the economic implications of the pandemic and what's happening, because I think a lot of what we will do in the future will be overshadowed by the economy of it all, and the funding that nations are losing, the downward trend, and that's really going to hit universities. And I think it's going to make life quite different for us for a while. So it's focusing on those benefits, I think, is the most important thing. Great to see you, Catherine.
Thanks, Alison. Monica?
For me, it would be empower your teachers, because I think that this emergency has really shown that teachers are committed much more than what we would expect, and that we could expect given their role in society, or accepting society and the salary. So I think that is really important that the teachers are giving different means to go ahead with this, call it revolution, and to change really the learning system.
Okay, Davinia?
Yeah, I wanted to say my recommendation would be to take advantage of the speed and enthusiasm that has been clear from teachers, as they said. So the enthusiasms embrace some technology enhanced learning, but also be prepared to disappointments that will be starting to appear soon. Disappointments in terms of the kind of kamikaze approach that some teachers are following, some professors are following, derived from the speed, the workload, their own ambitious aims that it won't be possible to meet these our ambitious goals, the suboptimal uses of TEL, wrong beliefs about what technology can solve, and limited time for reflection. So try to take advantage of the current enthusiasm, but be prepared for disappointments.
Mm-hmm. Very good recommendation. There was another question from Marka Eratste. I'm not sure if I get it correctly. From research and policy perspective, what would be the urgent dimensions to explore in this emergency remote teaching within social technological system? I'm not fully getting the question. Do you get it? Otherwise, Marka, you can also just speak up if you can.
Maybe what would be important for tele-research to answer? What research questions?
That was another question I had on my list. So okay, we talked now a little bit on the competence development perspective. So how do we take it from here? What does it mean for the research in TEL in the future? So what are the applications? You already started a study, Alison. There are some questions going around. So do we still need to do acceptance studies, or don't we do them anymore because we assume that technology is now accepted and widespread? What do you think?
Well, our study is really focusing on well-being because we think at the moment that's very important. Of course, we're not always going to have a pandemic, but I think some of the implications are going to be quite far-reaching. So a lot of what we're trying to bring to the foreground is how people feel, and you know, this idea about empowering the teachers, I think, is really important, and also enabling the teachers to reconnect with the learners. I mean, at the moment that's across distance because none of us are actually meeting face to face. But longer term, how do we meet in a better sense online the students, and this is partly what I mean by the student, the benefits to the learners.
I would like to come back to Monica's comment with missing the students. So, and that also connects to the emotional side. I have the same at the moment. So I'm really missing this discourse, this liveliness, and so on and so on. So I'm also curious. I mean, how do we? So all this discussion around blending, hybrid models, and so on. So do we really assume that we can build this social context at all with technology? Probably not. But then how is the mix then happening? So how do we keep this emotional connection to our students while at the same time being flexible with online formats? So I think this is also very much an unanswered question. And I'm very much interested in that you're focusing on emotions, because this is also pretty much a time where people realize that while distance teaching, distance learning, distance management might be a nice alternative if you have the ability to meet, at the moment it feels also very much like it's a second-hand option that you have to do right at the moment. We have 5 minutes before closing the session. Just looking if there Manolis, hi. If you still take questions, I would suggest 2 things to discuss. Most important, long-term concern, 9 months onwards, one silver lining or positive thought everyone has. Yeah, that's a good one. So let's make a short round on the long-term concern, and then we close the session with a silver lining or a positive thought. Let's start with the long-term concern. 9 months from here, where are we? What are we doing? What are we busy with? Depends also very much on the situation, of course. Huh? If we have a pandemic that's coming back, I would say I would expect the next. So anyway, I think after the crisis will be before the crisis. So I hope we will be better prepared on handling this kind of situation. At the same time, I think we might be also more aware about what has failed in mimicking the traditional face-to-face teaching into an online format. So maybe we develop new ideas how we can talk about social presence online, how we can connect even better than we are doing right now. I'm sorry that it is Zoom, but there was no other way to organize this in such a short notice. Any other ideas on this long-term perspective from your side?
Yeah, I think one thing I agree that I would expect long-term that the next time such a pandemic hits, that we are better prepared. We have a better basic infrastructure and a better educational ecosystem in the educational institutions set up. And the second thing is, on the other hand, if in 9 months we are still in a kind of near lockdown or restricted situation as we are now in Austria, I would really expect that we reach 100% of the children and the students. So currently, we know in Austria that depending on background, 10 to 20% of the students cannot be reached by their teachers. And I think already this is problematic for 4 weeks, and this is problematic for 8 weeks. But if in 9 months we are still in this situation, then we clearly need to reach the 100%. Yeah, everything else is fahrlässig in German. Everything else is a crime. Yeah. Yeah,
good point. That also clinks back to the social inclusion aspects that we mentioned earlier in the session. And on the other hand, I think this is also a very difficult aspect to touch on. But I think it would be also for recommendations for policy institutions that they are aware that we cannot expect everybody having access to devices, to unlimited internet, even, and I had some talks to school teachers this week, even having a place to be on your own and be working. This is really a high level assumption that we are setting. And if we do the policies from there, I'm afraid that we lose a lot of the population by taking this very high level. But we agreed we would do some last round of positivity. And I would like to let Alison start. Maybe we do the same round like in the closing.
So my positive take-home message is, I think there's a lot that we've taken for granted in the past, which we now appreciate much more. And I think that can be true for online learning as well. I mean, even when it's not at its best in terms of design or whatever, it can be quite powerful and effective way of connecting with students. So yeah, appreciate what we have.
Okay, thank you. Monica?
No, I like Zoom. So it's not a problem with Zoom, it's with and I don't know, sometimes there are days where I feel the only positive thing that I can think about is this will be over and we will go back to our life at some point. I think that one positive thing is how far we have managed to go when we have been pushed to do it with all the pros and cons. So I really hope that this we will be more prepared, but also more creative, more resilient.
Thank you, Monica. Lucia?
Well, I think that despite every beautiful technology, we have seen again that the human factor is the big engine behind everything. And even if some engineers tell me it's not true, we will never substitute human people or humans as a whole. And I also think, which is positive to me, and I also think we've all been learning a lot. not only in business terms, but also on the personal side. And I think that will help us to, well, it might sound pathetic, but try and change this society for the better.
Thank you. Davinia?
My message could be that we are living interesting times. There is still, from the perspective of technology-enhanced learning, from the perspective of TEL, there's still a lot that need to be seen, that need to be studied, but this can mean a revolution for the domain. This can mean that TEL is moving to kind of another paradigm where we will have a contextual change. There will be change in beliefs of of the teachers and their beliefs about TEL, their mindsets, their practices, their skills, and this will lead to new challenges, new probably changes in our methods and our instruments. Yeah, interesting times for the domain.
Thank you, Davinia. Viktoria?
The silver lining to me is to see that life is still really good. So yes, we live in interesting times and everything is very difficult, and there are a lot of problems ahead, and all the issues are maybe anxiety inducing. But to me, the silver lining really is the presence, and the presence is really good.
Okay. Then I would also like to add something positive for ending this very interesting panel. So I think if I would like to keep one momentum at the moment, it is the appreciation of teachers and teaching as a professional practice. I would really love that this will be remembered from society. Also that a lot of public servants at the moment are really, really working very, very hard to keep the society going. I think that's also a surprisingly good sign of the crisis, that you see that a lot of the public infrastructure just works also outside of office hours if you have a crisis. And I really would like to see huge investments in teachers, teacher professionalization, and everything that is needed for that, which is also based on so many studies. We don't need to study that anymore, I would say, looking at OECD numbers. Okay, then I would like to thank you all for joining this very, very interesting panel. I have really, really enjoyed this session with all of you. I think we've collected quite some interesting perspectives, and we saw quite some similarities, but also differences in implementations. I would have 100 more questions, but I also wouldn't like to do much longer than we had promised to do. Thank you very much for joining. Also to the participants in the session, please send us your feedback about it. Maybe looking at how stuff develops in some weeks or months, it's a good moment to repeat this.